He was just a poor beggar, until he made the paralyzed son of a millionaire laugh. Richard Thompson was carrying his son Ethan in his arms when the 2-year-old began to let out a crystal-clear laugh that echoed down the bustling Fifth Avenue. It was the first time in 8 long months that the businessman had heard that sound. The one responsible for this miracle was a ragged man of about 40, juggling empty soda cans while contorting his face comically. Frank, as he was known by the other homeless people, had stopped his performance upon seeing the child in the well-dressed man's arms and decided to improvise a special show. "Look here, little prince," Frank shouted, pretending to trip over his own bare feet. "This clown forgot how to walk." Ethan clapped his hands and laughed even harder, a sound that made Richard's heart tighten. Since the accident that left the boy without movement in his legs, he hadn't shown any emotion. The doctors had said it could take years for the child to react normally again. "Keep going," Richard called, pulling some bills from his pocket. "Make him laugh again." Frank stopped immediately and shook his head. "Kids aren't business, boss. If the little one's laughing, it's because he needs to. That's priceless." The answer left Richard confused. He was used to buying whatever he wanted, but this dirty, barefoot man was refusing his money. "What do you mean, priceless?" "Everyone has a price," the businessman insisted. "You can name any price you want," Frank replied, stuffing the cans into a torn plastic bag. "But that child's joy is worth more than all the money in the world, and from what I see, he needs joy real bad." Ethan stretched his little arms toward Frank, babbling some unintelligible words. It was the first time he'd shown interest in anyone since the accident. Richard watched the scene with a tight chest. Over the past months, he'd consulted the best specialists in the country, bought every possible piece of equipment, hired the finest therapists. Nothing had worked. And here was a beggar achieving in 5 minutes what expensive doctors hadn't in months. "What's your name?" Richard asked. "Frank Miller, at your service." "And the little one there? What's his name?" "Ethan. Ethan Thompson." Frank stepped closer slowly and made a funny face at the child, who laughed again. "Ethan's a strong name, a warrior's name. Bet you're going to be a real brave warrior, huh, champ?" The boy clapped again, and Richard felt tears burning his eyes. It had been so long since he'd seen his son happy. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us newcomers out. Now, back to the story. "Listen," Richard said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I have a proposal for you. Already told you it's not business, Doc. It's not about money, it's about Ethan. He ended up like this after an accident. The doctors said it could take years for him to recover emotionally. But you made him laugh in just minutes." Frank looked at Ethan with a different expression, more serious. There was recognition in his eyes, as if he understood exactly what the child was going through. "What kind of accident?" he asked quietly. Richard hesitated. He wasn't one to share his personal life with strangers, let alone a homeless man. But something in Frank's voice made him continue. "He fell down the stairs at home, hit his spine. The doctors said his legs might recover with therapy, but..." His voice faltered. "But he doesn't speak, doesn't laugh, doesn't react to anything. It's like he's given up on living." Frank nodded slowly, like someone familiar with that kind of pain. Emotional trauma. Seen it before. The child withdraws because the world has become a frightening place. "Do you understand these things?" Frank gave a sad smile. "I understand more than I'd like to, Doctor. More than I'd like." At that moment, Jennifer, Richard's secretary, came running. She had stayed in the car waiting while her boss resolved an issue at the bank. "Mr. Thompson, sorry for the delay. The traffic was..." She stopped upon seeing Frank. "Impossible." Richard noticed Jennifer's disapproving look when she saw the homeless man near Ethan. "Jennifer, this is Frank." He managed to make Ethan laugh. Jennifer looked skeptically at the disheveled man. "Oh, that's nice, sir, but perhaps we should head home. Mrs. Thompson is waiting." Richard knew Jennifer was right. Catherine, his wife, would be furious if she knew he had stopped on the street to talk to a homeless man, especially with Ethan in his arms. After the accident, she had become overprotective, to the point of not letting anyone else touch the boy except her and the therapists. "Do you come here every day?" Richard asked Frank. "Every day, Doctor. This has been my spot for 3 years. Then maybe we can see each other again." Frank shook his head. "I don't want to cause trouble for you. People like me don't mix with people like you." "It's not mixing, it's about my son." Ethan, who had been quiet during the conversation, suddenly reached his little arms toward Frank again and said a clear word. "Clown." Richard and Jennifer froze. It was the first word Ethan had spoken since the accident. Frank smiled and gave an exaggerated bow. "At your service, Prince Ethan." The boy laughed so hard he started hiccuping with joy. Richard felt the world spin. 8 months of silence broken by a homeless man juggling on the street. "Jennifer," Richard said, his voice choked, "note the time. I want to know exactly what time it is." "It's 2:15 in the afternoon, sir." "Tomorrow at 2:15 we'll be here again." Frank raised his hand. "Doctor, I don't know if—" "Please," Richard interrupted. "My son spoke for the first time in 8 months. You can't deny me this." Frank looked at Ethan, who was still smiling, and sighed. "All right, but it has to be here on the street. I don't go to rich people's houses." "Why not?" "Because I've learned that a poor man's place is on the street. Rich folks don't like sharing space with people like me." Richard wanted to argue, but something in Frank's tone made him realize there was a story behind those words. "Then tomorrow, right here." "Tomorrow, right here," Frank agreed. On the way home, Richard couldn't wipe the smile off his face. Ethan had fallen asleep in the back seat, still with a little smile on his lips. It was as if a part of him had come back to life. "Mr. Thompson," Jennifer said hesitantly, "are you sure this is a good idea?" "Why wouldn't it be?" "Well, Mrs. Catherine might not approve. And that man, he seems a bit suspicious." "Suspicious how? How did he know so much about emotional trauma?" "Homeless people don't study psychology." Richard grew thoughtful. Jennifer had reason to worry, but Ethan had spoken for the first time in months. As a father, he was willing to risk everything to see his son recover. When they arrived at the mansion in Beverly Hills, Catherine was waiting at the door. She was an elegant 35-year-old woman with blonde hair, always tied in a perfect bun. But since Ethan's accident, there had been a permanent sadness in her eyes. "How was the appointment?" she asked, taking Ethan from Richard's arms. "Dr. Phillips said he's progressing well physically. His legs are responding to the exercises." "And emotionally?" Richard hesitated. He knew Catherine wouldn't react well if she knew the truth. "He's making progress too," he lied. Catherine looked at their son, who slept peacefully. "He seems different today, more relaxed. It's perhaps the appointment had been good for him." That night, Richard barely slept. He kept thinking about Frank and how he had managed to connect with Ethan. There was something in the homeless man's gaze, a deep understanding that went beyond simple clowning around. The next day, Richard made up an excuse to leave during lunch. He told Catherine he had an important meeting and took Ethan along, claiming the fresh air would do the boy good. At exactly 2:15, they arrived at 5th Avenue. Frank was there, as promised, juggling 3 crumpled cans. "Hi, Prince Ethan," Frank called out when he saw the child. Ethan immediately started laughing and clapping. Richard felt a wave of relief. It hadn't just been luck the day before. "Today I brought a special show," Frank announced, pulling a small doll made from plastic bottles out of his bag. "This is Captain Recycle, the world's clumsiest superhero." For 40 minutes, Frank put on a one-of-a-kind performance for Ethan. He made up stories, sang silly songs, and made the doll dance awkwardly. Ethan couldn't stop laughing and even tried to babble a few words. "How do you do that?" Richard asked when the show ended. "Do what?" "Connect with him. The best child therapists in the country couldn't get a reaction like that." Frank looked at Ethan tenderly. "Maybe because they see a sick child. I see a child who needs to play. But you know exactly what to do. That's not luck." Frank was quiet for a moment. "I've worked with kids before, a long time ago." "What kind of work?" "I was a teacher, a special education teacher." Richard felt a mix of surprise and relief. Frank wasn't just any homeless man. "What happened? Why did you stop teaching?" Frank's face closed off. "Sometimes life takes everything from you at once, Doctor. Sometimes there are no options left. Richard wanted to press further, but he could tell Frank wasn't willing to talk about it. Well, whatever the past, you have a gift with children, and Ethan needs you to— Doctor, I already told you to— Let me finish, Richard interrupted. I'm not offering money, I'm asking for help as a father. My son went 8 months without speaking, laughing, or reacting to anything. In 2 days with you, he's become a child again. I'm begging you to keep coming here. Frank looked at Ethan, who was playing with the plastic bottle doll. All right, he sighed, but only for him, and only here on the street. Richard smiled, feeling there was real hope for Ethan. Over the next week, Richard started making excuses every day to be on 5th Avenue at 2:15. Ethan eagerly awaited the moment to see Frank, and his progress was visible. He started saying a few words again, smiled often, and even tried to move around during playtime. Jennifer began to suspect something was up. Mr. Thompson, do you really need to leave every day at lunch? They're important meetings, Jennifer. With who? There aren't any meetings scheduled on the calendar. Richard realized he couldn't keep up the charade much longer. It's about a special project. For Ethan. What kind of project? An alternative therapy. Very experimental. Jennifer nodded, but Richard could tell she wasn't entirely convinced. That Friday, Richard arrived at 5th Avenue and didn't find Frank. He waited an hour, but the homeless man never showed up. Ethan started crying, asking for the clown. Where's the clown, Daddy? The boy repeated, and Richard didn't know what to say. On Saturday morning, Richard decided to look for Frank. He knew it wouldn't be easy to find a homeless man in a city like New York, but he had to try. He walked the streets near 5th Avenue, asking other homeless people if they knew Frank. Most ignored him or asked for money, until he came across an elderly woman named Mrs. Wilson, who sold candy at a traffic light. Frank. Of course I know him. Good man, that one. Always helps those in need. Do you know where I can find him? He's probably at the Brooklyn Bridge taking care of Betty. She got sick yesterday, and Frank went to look after her. Richard followed the directions and found Frank under the bridge, next to a woman around 60 who was coughing badly. Frank! The homeless man looked up, surprised. Dr. Richard, what are you doing here? You didn't show up yesterday. Ethan was waiting. Frank glanced at the sick woman. Betty needed help. I couldn't leave her alone. What about Ethan? Do you have money to take her to the hospital, doctor? I don't, so I'll stay here and care for her until she gets better, or until she doesn't. Richard looked around. At least 10 people were living under that bridge in terrible conditions. Dirty children played with trash, while adults shared scraps of food. You live here? We don't live anywhere, doctor. We exist where we can. Richard felt a tightness in his chest. He'd grown up in a wealthy family and never had to worry about basic needs. Seeing that reality up close was shocking. Frank, I need you to come tomorrow. Ethan, he's regressed, he's gone quiet again, didn't want to eat properly. I can't leave Betty. Then I'll pay for her hospital care. Frank stood up abruptly. I don't want your charity, doctor. It's not charity, it's a favor. You help me with Ethan, I help you with Betty. And after, when Betty recovers and Ethan doesn't need me anymore, what happens to us? Richard didn't know how to answer. He'd never thought long term. Let me come up with a better solution, he said. Don't bother, doctor. Our lives have always been like this. One day we have something, the next we don't. I'll show up on Monday if I can. Richard went home disturbed. For the first time, he was seeing life beyond his own little world. He talked to Catherine about possibly helping some charities, but she didn't understand his sudden change of interest. Why this concern for the homeless? She asked. I just think we can do more for society. Richard, you already donate to several organizations, and we have our own problems to deal with. It was true. Ethan still needed a lot of care and attention, but Richard couldn't get the image out of his head. Frank taking care of Betty as if she were family. On Monday, Frank showed up on 5th Avenue, but Richard noticed he looked different, more tired, worried. How's Betty? Better. A neighbor is watching her today. Ethan was thrilled to see Frank and immediately asked to play with Captain Recycle. Throughout the performance, Richard watched Frank closely. There was a deep sadness in him, but when he interacted with Ethan, that sadness disappeared. After the game, Richard asked a question that had been stuck in his throat for days. "Frank, do you have children?" The homeless man's face twisted in pain. "I did. My daughter, Emma. She had cerebral palsy, just like Ethan. Stayed with me until she was 5. Richard understood immediately why Frank knew exactly how to handle Ethan. What happened? Pneumonia. Couldn't pay for treatment in time. The revelation hit Richard like a punch to the gut. Frank had lost a daughter with problems similar to Ethan's, yet he still spent his time helping another child. "Frank, I'm so sorry. That's why I know what to do with Ethan, doctor, because I've been through it. And I know how important it is for a child like that to have joy in life. You could have told me sooner." "Why? So you could pity me." "I don't need pity, doctor. I need dignity." Richard stayed silent, processing the information. Frank wasn't just a homeless man who performed tricks. He was a father who had lost everything and still found the strength to help other children. "How did you become a teacher?" "I studied education at a public university. I specialized in special education because of Emma. I wanted to understand how to help her and other children." "And why did you stop teaching?" Frank hesitated for a long moment. "There was a misunderstanding. An unfair accusation. I lost my job, my reputation, my home, everything." "What kind of accusation?" "A child got hurt in my class. The parents blamed me for negligence. I couldn't prove my innocence because I was going through a very tough time back then. Emma had just passed away." Richard realized Frank had lost everything in a very short time. His daughter, his job, his home, his dignity. "But you were innocent." "Of course I was. I would never hurt a child on purpose. But I was depressed. I couldn't defend myself properly. And who's going to believe the word of a poor teacher over that of a wealthy family?" The irony wasn't lost on Richard. He himself was part of a wealthy family, and Frank was helping his son without asking for anything in return. "Frank, I'd like to propose something different. I already said I don't want a job, doctor. It's not a job. It's a partnership." Frank looked skeptical. "What kind of partnership?" "You know therapeutic techniques that are working with Ethan. I have resources. We could create something together to help more children." "How so?" "A project. A space where children with special needs can play and develop. You'd be the educational coordinator." Frank shook his head. "I've heard that story before, doctor. Rich folks promising the world, and in the end, the poor are left holding the bag. I'm not like that." "They all say that, doctor, all of them. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps those of us just starting out." Now, continuing, Richard realized he'd have to prove his intentions with actions, not words. For the rest of the week, he kept bringing Ethan to meet Frank, but he also began observing the homeless community. He saw Frank wasn't the only one with special skills. Mrs. Wilson, who sold candy, had been an accountant. Old George, who watched over cars, was a former specialized mechanic. They all had life stories that led them to the streets, but they still held unique knowledge and talents. By Friday, Richard had made a decision. He hired Jennifer for a special mission. "Jennifer, I need you to investigate the story of a man named Frank Miller, a former special education teacher. I want to know exactly what happened to him." "Does this have to do with your mysterious meetings?" "Yes, and it might be the most important thing I've ever asked you to do." Jennifer didn't ask further questions and began her investigation. In 3 days, she had gathered complete information about Frank. "Mr. Thompson, Frank's case is very sad. He truly was wronged." "How so?" "The negligence charge was dropped 6 months later. They found out the child had been hurt due to faulty school equipment, not because of him. But when they tried to reinstate him, Frank had disappeared. He was living on the streets." Richard felt a mix of relief and outrage. "And no one went after him?" "The school principal tried, but Frank had lost faith in the system. He said he didn't want to work with children anymore. But he's working with Ethan. Maybe because it's different. On the streets, he's in control. Richard spent the weekend thinking about how to use that information. He couldn't just tell Frank he'd investigated his life. He had to find a delicate way to approach the subject. On Monday, he took Ethan to their usual meeting, but this time he brought a surprise. "Frank, today I brought someone special to meet you." "Who?" "Teacher Margaret Taylor, former principal of Washington Elementary School." Frank paled when he saw the woman in her 50s approach. "Professor Frank," she said, her voice trembling, "I searched for you for months." Frank wanted to walk away, but Richard blocked his path. "Listen to her, Frank, just listen." "Professor, the case has been cleared. You were exonerated of all accusations. The fault was with the defective equipment, never yours." Frank stood still, processing the information. Why didn't anyone come to me back then?" "We tried, but you had disappeared. When we got your address, the house was empty. I lost everything. I had nowhere to live." "Professor, I came here to apologize on behalf of the school and offer you reinstatement, with all your rights, including back pay for these 3 years." Frank looked at Ethan, who was playing, oblivious to the conversation. "I can't go back. I can't work inside a classroom anymore." "Why not?" Because I don't trust the system anymore. What if there's another accusation? What if I'm wronged again?" Richard understood Frank's trauma. The injustice had left a deep wound. "What if it wasn't in a traditional classroom?" Richard suggested. "What do you mean?" "A different project. Outdoors, with kids who really need help." Margaret looked intrigued. "What kind of project?" Richard took a deep breath. It was time to present his idea. "A community rehabilitation center through play, a place where children with special needs from all social classes can play, learn, and grow together." Frank stayed quiet for a long moment. "Where would it be?" "I don't know yet, but I know you'd be essential to making it work." "Professor Frank," Margaret said, "regardless of this project, the school's doors are open to you. You never should have lost your job." "Thank you, teacher, but I can't go back to the classroom, at least not yet." "Then will you join my project?" Richard asked. "I need to think." "Think? But Ethan needs you, and I'm sure there are many other kids who do too." That night, Richard talked to Catherine about the project. He explained about Frank, about the homeless community, about the possibility of creating something that would truly make a difference. "Richard, this sounds very risky and expensive. Ethan improved 100% in 2 weeks. Imagine what we could achieve with more time and proper structure. But mixing kids from different backgrounds, will other parents accept it? If it works, they will. And if it doesn't, then at least we tried to do something good." Catherine grew thoughtful. "You've changed, Richard. Ever since this whole thing with the homeless man started, you've been different." "Different how?" "More human, more concerned about others." Richard smiled. "Maybe Frank taught me as much as he taught Ethan." On Tuesday, Frank gave his answer. "I'll join the project, but with conditions." "What are they?" "First, I don't want a salary, I want a partnership. If it succeeds, we share the profits with the community." "There won't be profits. It's a social project." "Second, I want other homeless people to join too. Everyone can contribute with their skills." "Agreed." "Third, it has to be a place where any child can come, rich or poor. No discrimination." "Perfect." "And fourth, if I feel it's turning into a business, I walk away." Richard extended his hand. "Deal." Frank hesitated for a moment, then shook the businessman's hand. But things wouldn't be so simple. The following week, Richard discovered there was a very powerful person interested in stopping his project, his own partner, Michael Parker. "Richard, have you lost your mind?" Michael said during an executive meeting. "You want to create a social project with homeless people? That will tarnish our company's reputation." "Why would it?" "Because our clients won't want to associate with a company that mingles with outcasts." "They're not outcasts. They're people who've fallen on hard times." "Richard, you're being naive. Homeless people are homeless for a reason. Laziness, drugs, alcoholism." Frank is a former university professor. Mrs. Wilson is a former accountant. Old George is a retired master mechanic. They all lost everything due to life's circumstances, not by choice. Their past doesn't matter. What matters is our company's image. Richard realized he had a tough battle ahead. Michael controlled 40% of the company and had influence over other shareholders. Michael, this doesn't affect the company's business. It's a personal project. A personal project using our money? Using my money? Richard, you're the face of this company. Everything you do reflects on all of us. The argument dragged on for hours without resolution. Richard knew Michael wouldn't back down easily. That night, he talked to Catherine about the resistance he was facing. Maybe Michael is right, Richard. Maybe it's too risky. Ethan is improving every day. How can I ignore that? You can still take him to see Frank on the street. But what about the other children who could be helped? Catherine fell silent. She knew her husband was right, but she also feared the consequences. The next day, Richard got a surprise when he arrived on Fifth Avenue. A well-dressed woman was talking to Frank, and Ethan was in her arms. "Richard!" the woman called out when she saw him. It was Rebecca Armstrong, a former college classmate who had become a child psychologist. "Rebecca, what are you doing here?" "I came to meet the famous Frank. Jennifer told me about your project." Richard glanced at Jennifer, who shrugged. "I thought Dr. Rebecca could help," Jennifer explained. "Richard," Rebecca said, "I need to talk to you about what Frank is doing with Ethan." Richard's stomach tightened. Was Rebecca here to raise more objections? What about what he's doing? It's revolutionary. I've never seen such an effective technique for childhood emotional trauma. Where did you learn this, Frank? Frank seemed surprised by the praise. "I learned it while caring for my daughter, Doctor." "Did your daughter have special needs?" "She had cerebral palsy." Rebecca nodded in understanding. "Richard, if you're thinking of starting a project with Frank, I want in. Officially." "Really?" "Absolutely. What I'm seeing here could revolutionize child therapy in the United States." Richard felt a wave of relief. He'd finally found a professional ally. "Rebecca, what do you think about mixing children from different social classes?" "I think it's essential. Children learn from each other far better than from adults." Frank, who had been quiet during the conversation, finally spoke. "Doctor, with all due respect, I don't want this to turn into another rich people's business." "It won't," Rebecca replied. "It'll become something much more important, a revolution in how we treat special needs children." Over the next 2 weeks, the group began to take shape. Besides Richard, Frank, and Rebecca, they were joined by Mrs. Wilson, who could teach basic math, Old George, who could teach hands-on skills, and Margaret, the former principal, who could oversee the formal educational side. But as the project took form, the resistance from Michael and other business leaders in Richard's circle grew stronger. "Richard," Michael said in a private conversation, "either you drop this nonsense or we'll have to reconsider your position in the company." "Are you threatening me?" "I'm being practical. The other partners are concerned. They think you're going through a personal crisis. And what if I am? What if this crisis makes me a better person? Richard, be realistic. You have responsibilities to the company, to your family, to your employees. And to my son? And to other children who could be helped? There are specialized institutions for that. There are expensive and exclusive institutions. Frank achieves results that expensive institutions can't." The pressure grew when Michael started spreading rumors about Richard's mental instability. Some important clients began questioning whether they wanted to do business with someone who was associating with lowlifes. Richard came home on a Friday completely discouraged. Catherine noticed his state. "What happened?" "Michael is sabotaging the project, and he might end up sabotaging our company too." "Richard, maybe it's time to consider if it's worth it." "What do you mean?" "You're risking everything we've built for a homeless man and a project that might not work." "Ethan has improved 80%, Catherine. 80%. How can you say it's not worth it?" "Because there are other ways to help Ethan without risking our financial stability." Richard looked at his wife with a mix of disappointment and understanding. She was scared, and that was understandable. "Catherine, if I give up now, what kind of father will I be? What kind of man will I be? A responsible man or a coward?" That night, Richard couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about all the children who could be helped if the project succeeded. He thought about Frank, who had lost everything and still found the strength to help others. He thought about Ethan, who for the first time in months was truly happy. On Monday morning, he made a decision that would change his life forever. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing, Richard arrived at the office determined. He asked Jennifer to call an emergency meeting with all the partners. "Michael," he said once everyone was gathered, "you're right about one thing. I'm going through a personal crisis, a crisis of values." "Richard, I'm glad you recognize I'm not finished. This crisis made me realize I've spent 35 years of my life focused only on making money. And I almost lost my son because of it." "Richard, you didn't lose your son. He's alive and getting better." "He's getting better because of Frank, not because of all my wealth. A homeless man did for my son what my money couldn't." Michael sighed impatiently. "Where are you going with this?" "Here's where I'm going. I'm leaving the partnership." A heavy silence filled the room. "What do you mean, leaving?" "I'm selling my share of the company and investing everything in the project with Frank." "Richard, you can't be serious." "I'm completely serious, Michael. You've always said I was disrupting business with my social craziness. Now you'll have the chance to run the company the way you've always wanted." "Richard, think this through. You're throwing away 20 years of work." "I'm not throwing it away. I'm investing in something that truly matters." Michael tried to argue, but Richard had already made his decision. When Richard got home that night and told Catherine what he'd done, she was in shock. "Richard, have you lost your mind? How will you support our family? I have enough savings for a few years, and if the project succeeds, we can live more simply but happier." "More simply? Richard, Ethan needs expensive treatments, private school. Ethan needs love and attention, and Frank is giving that for free." Catherine began to cry. "You didn't think about me. You didn't think about what I want for our family." "I thought about Ethan, and I thought about the kind of person I want to be for him. What if everything goes wrong? Then we'll start over. Together." Catherine didn't speak to Richard for several days. She had grown up in a middle-class family, and financial security was very important to her. The idea of giving up everything for an uncertain project terrified her deeply. But then something happened that changed her perspective. On Wednesday, she decided to secretly go to Fifth Avenue to see with her own eyes what Frank was doing with Ethan. She watched from a distance, hidden behind a column. She saw Frank playing not only with Ethan, but with two other children who had approached. One was clearly from a poor family, wearing patched clothes. The other seemed middle class. Frank treated all three exactly the same, with affection, patience, and genuine joy. There was no difference between the rich child and the poor one. They were simply children who needed to play. But what struck Catherine most was seeing Ethan trying to get up on his own to reach a toy Frank had tossed away. The boy made a tremendous effort and managed to crawl a few feet. It was the most movement he'd made since the accident. "Ethan!" she shouted, unable to hold back. Everyone turned to look at her. Richard was surprised to see his wife there. "Catherine, what are you doing here?" I wanted to see." Ethan, seeing his mother, tried to crawl toward her. Catherine ran and scooped him up, crying, "My love, you moved. You moved all by yourself." Frank approached gently. "Mrs. Thompson, your son is a fighter. He's working so hard to recover." Catherine looked at Frank for the first time without prejudice. She saw past the old clothes and unshaven beard. She saw a man who genuinely cared for her child. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling. "Thank you for looking after my boy." "No need to thank me, Mom. Taking care of kids is what gives my life meaning." That night, Catherine had a serious talk with Richard. "I saw Ethan trying to walk today, on his own." "You did?" "I was hiding, watching. Richard, what Frank does it's magic." "It's not magic. It's love. It's dedication. It's knowledge applied with heart." I was wrong about the project, about Frank, about everything." Richard took his wife's hand. "You were scared. It's understandable. But now I get it. Ethan doesn't just need money. He needs people who truly care about him. And you're willing to support the project? I'm willing to join the project. Richard was surprised. What do you mean? I have a degree in business, remember? I can help structure everything professionally. Richard hugged his wife, feeling he'd finally found a true partner. Over the next few weeks, the team grew. Catherine brought her administrative experience, Rebecca her clinical expertise, Margaret her teaching knowledge, and Frank his unique ability to connect with special needs children. They were also joined by Mrs. Wilson, who, besides being a former accountant, had experience caring for grandchildren with learning difficulties, and old George, who discovered a natural talent for making educational toys from recycled materials. But one fundamental question remained. Where would the center be? It needs to be a big space, Frank said during a meeting at Richard's apartment, and it needs to be accessible for kids from all walks of life. Ideally somewhere central but with green space, Rebecca added. And affordable, Mrs. Wilson reminded them. Otherwise it won't be sustainable. Richard had thought a lot about it. He owned a few properties that could work, but they were all in upscale neighborhoods, making it harder for poorer families to access them. It was Jennifer who brought an unexpected solution. Mr. Thompson, do you remember the plot of land your company won in a lawsuit 5 years ago? Which plot? The one in Queens. You said at the time it was too small for commercial construction. Richard remembered. It was a 5,000 square foot lot he'd acquired from a debtor company. He'd never known what to do with it because it wasn't commercially viable. That land won't work, Jennifer. It's too small. For commercial construction, yes, but for a community center, Richard pulled out the land survey and showed it to the group. Frank and Margaret examined it carefully. It's perfect, Margaret said, just the right size for a pilot project. And the location is excellent, Frank added. It's between an affluent neighborhood and a lower income one. Kids from both sides could come. Is there public transportation? Mrs. Wilson asked. 3 bus lines and a subway station 5 blocks away, Jennifer replied. Richard felt a growing excitement. They'd finally found the ideal spot. How much would it cost to build the facilities? Catherine asked. Let me get an estimate, Richard said. But I believe with the money from selling my share of the company, we could build and sustain it for at least 2 years. Over the next month, Richard worked tirelessly on the architectural design. He wanted to create a space that was both functional and welcoming. The blueprint included a play area adapted for children with limited mobility, activity rooms with specialized educational materials, a small library, a kitchen for preparing snacks, a sensory garden, a workshop for old George to make toys, and an administrative area. But during the planning phase, new obstacles arose. The city created hurdles for approving the project, citing zoning issues. It's obvious someone's sabotaging us, Catherine said after the 4th permit denial. Who would have an interest in this? Michael. He has connections at City Hall. Richard didn't want to believe his former partner would go that far, but the evidence was clear. Every document they submitted was lost or needed corrections. It was Frank who suggested a different strategy. Dr. Thompson, why don't we start with a pilot project first? No construction, just outdoor activities. How so? On the land itself, we clean up the space, set up some tents, and start serving the kids. Once the community sees the results, it'll be hard for anyone to oppose. The idea was risky but made sense. Start small, prove it worked, then expand. But what about the legal side? Margaret asked. Let's register it as a university outreach program, Rebecca suggested. I have contacts at NYU who can help. 2 weeks later, the Frank Miller Community Center, a name suggested by Frank himself in honor of his daughter Emma, launched as a pilot. The first day was both thrilling and nerve-wracking. Only 4 children showed up. Ethan, a girl with Down syndrome named Sophia, an autistic boy named Jacob, and a little girl with cerebral palsy named Olivia. Frank worked with all of them simultaneously, creating games tailored to each child's specific needs. Rebecca observed and took notes, documenting every bit of progress. Mrs. Wilson taught basic math using colored pebbles. Old George showed them how to make toys from plastic bottles. Margaret led an adapted storytelling circle. By the end of the day, all the children were exhausted but happy. And most importantly, they were interacting with one another. "How did it go?" Catherine asked Richard on their way home. "Magical," he replied. "I saw 4 kids who arrived isolated leave holding hands. And Ethan? Ethan tried to teach Olivia how to toss a ball." For the first time since the accident, he worried about someone else. In the second week, 8 children showed up. By the third week, 12. By the fourth, 23. Word of mouth was working. Desperate parents, who found no answers in traditional medicine, came seeking help in Frank's project. But the growth also brought new challenges. The makeshift space couldn't handle so many people. There weren't enough proper restrooms, covered areas for rainy days, or sufficient teaching materials. "We'll have to speed up construction," Richard said in an emergency meeting. "What about the permits?" Margaret asked. "I'll settle this once and for all." Richard scheduled a meeting directly with the mayor. He brought along a complete dossier on the project, with testimonials from parents, reports from Rebecca, and, most importantly, a video of Ethan walking on his own for the first time since the accident. "Mayor," Richard said, "I'm not here as a businessman. I'm here as a father and as a citizen concerned about the children in our city." The mayor, a 50-year-old man named William Grant, watched the video in silence. "Is this child your son?" "Yes. And 2 months ago he didn't speak, didn't laugh, didn't move. Today he plays, interacts, and walks. Because of this project? Because of Frank, a former teacher society cast aside, but who has a unique gift for working with special needs children." The mayor grew thoughtful. "Mr. Thompson, I'll be frank with you. I've received calls asking me to hinder your project." Richard wasn't surprised. From Michael Parker, among others, they say it's dangerous to mix children from different backgrounds, that it could create social conflict. "Mayor, do you have children?" "I do, 2. If one of them needed special help, would you care if that help came from a homeless man?" The mayor fell silent for a long moment. "No, if it worked, I wouldn't care." "Then please come see our work before making any decisions." The next day, Mayor William paid an unannounced visit to the site. He arrived without warning, accompanied only by an aide. He was greeted by Frank, who was playing with a group of 15 children of different ages and needs. "Mr. Mayor," Frank said, not stopping the game, "want to join our adapted musical chairs?" "How so?" "It's like regular musical chairs, but here no one gets out. When someone's left without a chair, everyone shares. Want to try?" The mayor, initially hesitant, ended up joining in. For 40 minutes, he played, laughed, and was moved by the natural interaction between the children. What struck him most was seeing Ethan help Olivia, who had more motor difficulties than him, participate in the game. "How do you manage this?" he asked afterward. "Manage what, Mayor?" Frank replied. "Getting the children to help each other instead of competing." "Oh, it's simple. We don't teach competition, we teach cooperation." On the way back to City Hall, the mayor was visibly emotional. "Mr. Mayor," his aide asked, "approve all the project's permits. Today." "But sir, you said you were going to—" "I said a lot of foolish things. That project is exactly what our city needs." "And the opposition?" "To hell with the opposition. I'm here to serve the children, not the businessmen." The following week, Richard got the call he'd been waiting for months. "Mr. Thompson, this is City Hall. All your permits have been approved. You can start construction whenever you'd like." Richard hung up and shouted with joy. Catherine came running from the kitchen. "What happened?" "They approved it. They approved everything. We can build." Catherine hugged her husband, crying with happiness. "Richard, I'm so proud of you. Of us. This was only possible because you bet on it with me." That evening, they celebrated as a family. Ethan, who now walked with the help of a walker, played building a house with stacking blocks. "Daddy," he said, "when Frank's house is finished, will I be able to help other kids too?" Richard was moved by the social awareness his son was developing. "Of course, sweetheart. You'll be Frank's best helper." "And I'll teach everyone to walk like I'm learning," Catherine whispered in Richard's ear. "Look at the amazing boy we have." Thanks to Frank. If it weren't for him, Ethan would still be silent in a corner. Construction began 2 weeks later. Richard decided to hire a small company, run by a young engineer named Brandon, who was enthusiastic about the social project. "Mr. Thompson," Brandon said, "I'll give you a special quote. This is the first time I've worked on a project that will truly help people." During the 3 months of construction, the pilot program continued operating in one section of the site. The children loved watching their house being built. Frank was involved in every detail, suggesting modifications based on practical experience. "Dr. Phillips, this ramp needs to be gentler. Olivia can't climb it at this angle. And we need more windows in the activity room. The kids like watching the street. The accessible bathroom needs to be bigger. Sometimes parents need to help, and there's no space." Each suggestion was immediately implemented. Richard had realized Frank was much more than a partner in the project. He was its heart. During this time, something unexpected happened. Ethan started walking without his walker. It was on a Thursday afternoon. He was playing with Jacob, the autistic boy, when the ball rolled away. Without thinking, Ethan stood up and took 5 steps to reach it. All activity stopped. Children, parents, and educators watched in silence. Ethan picked up the ball and walked back to Jacob. "Jacob," he said, "here's the ball. Now it's your turn." Frank was the first to react. He started clapping and shouting, "Bravo, Warrior Ethan, bravo!" All the children began celebrating. It was a spontaneous, emotional moment. Richard, who had just arrived, saw the scene and broke into tears. Catherine, who had been helping Mrs. Wilson with snacks, ran to her son. "Sweetheart, you're walking." "I am, Mom. Now I can play tag with everyone." That night was special in the Thompson household. For the first time in nearly a year, they felt like a complete family again. "Richard," Catherine said as they tucked Ethan into bed, "you saved our family." "It wasn't me. It was Frank. You were the one who had the courage to trust Frank. You were the one who dared to change. And you were the one who dared to support me. We did this together." Richard agreed, but he knew the real hero of the story was someone else. Frank, who had lost everything and still found the strength to bring joy to children. 2 weeks before the official opening, Richard made a surprising proposal. "Frank," he said at a meeting, "I want you to officially be the educational director of the center." "Doctor, we've talked about this. I don't want an official position. It's not about the title, it's about recognition. You're responsible for all this. You deserve to have your name officially tied to the project." Frank was quiet for a moment. "What if it goes wrong? What if someone accuses me again?" "It won't go wrong. And if anyone accuses you, they'll have to go through me first." Margaret supported him. "Professor Frank, you've already proven your competence. It's time to take your place," Rebecca added. "Frank, your methods are revolutionary. You need to document everything so others can apply them elsewhere." Mrs. Wilson, ever practical, said, "Son, what are you afraid of? You're already doing the work. You just need to sign some papers." Frank looked around the room, seeing all the friendly faces that had become his new family. "All right," he finally said. "I'll accept being the educational director, but on one condition." "What is it?" "I want Mrs. Wilson to be the administrative coordinator and old George to be in charge of the toy workshop." Everyone laughed and applauded. "Deal," Richard said. The official opening took place on a sunny Friday in October. Over 200 people attended: parents, children, officials, press, and many curious onlookers. Mayor William gave an emotional speech. "This center represents the best of our city. People from different backgrounds working together for a common goal. I hope it's the first of many." Richard also spoke. "A year ago, I was just a businessman worried about profits. Today, I'm a father who understands that true wealth lies in making a difference in people's lives." But the most moving speech came from Frank. "I lost my daughter Emma 4 years ago. I thought I'd never be able to work with children again. But you all gave me a new family. Ethan, Olivia, Jacob, Sophia, and all the other children who've come through here taught me that love never ends, it just transforms." At the end, Ethan had a surprise. He climbed onto the makeshift stage and said, "Uncle Frank, thank you for teaching me how to walk again, and for showing me that helping others makes us happy." There wasn't a dry eye in the audience. The celebration lasted until sunset. Children played on the new equipment, parents chatted animatedly, and the center's staff beamed with pride. At the end of the day, when everyone had left, Richard, Catherine, Frank, Margaret, Rebecca, Mrs. Wilson, and old George stood alone, admiring the fruits of their labor. "We did it," Richard said simply. "We did it," Frank repeated. "But now that we've done it, what do we do next?" "We keep going," Margaret replied, "and we expand. Other children in other cities need what you've built here." "That's true," Rebecca agreed. "I've already gotten calls from psychologists in San Diego, Pittsburgh, and Charlotte interested in the method." Richard smiled. "Then we have work for the next 10 years. "At least," Frank laughed. 6 months later, the Frank Miller Community Center was serving 80 regular children with a waiting list of over 100. The results were impressive. 90% of the children showed significant improvement in their conditions. More importantly, the center had created a real community. Parents from different social classes became friends, rich and poor children played together without distinction, and old prejudices were being broken down daily. Richard had found his true calling. He sold all his other properties and invested everything into expanding the project. Catherine became the administrative director and discovered a passion for social work she never knew she had. Frank flourished completely. He returned to school, specialized in play therapy, and was writing a book about his techniques. Most importantly, he had overcome the trauma of losing his daughter and found peace. Ethan became one of the most popular kids at the center. His full recovery inspired other families not to give up. He took on the unofficial role of the center's ambassador, always ready to help new children adjust. But perhaps the most beautiful outcome was the transformation of the entire community. The center had become a gathering place for families, where social differences no longer mattered in the face of the shared need to see their children happy. One Friday afternoon, nearly a year after the opening, Richard was organizing some documents when Ethan came running in. Daddy, a new family just arrived. A girl just like I was before." "What do you mean, like you were before?" "She doesn't talk or walk, and her mom is crying so much." Richard followed his son to the yard, where he saw a young woman holding a girl of about 3 years old in her arms. The child was completely apathetic, not reacting to anything around her. "Excuse me," Richard approached. "Can I help?" "My name is Amanda," the woman said through tears. "This is my daughter, Lily. She hasn't spoken since her father left 6 months ago." Richard felt a pang in his heart. He recognized in the woman the same despair he had felt with Ethan. "Amanda, you've come to the right place. You've come. Here your daughter will learn that the world can still be a happy place. Do you think you can help her?" Before Richard could answer, Frank appeared carrying a silly doll made of colorful socks. "Hi, Princess Lily," he said to the girl. "This is Miss Woolsey, the clumsiest doll in the world. Want to see her dance?" Frank began an impromptu performance, making the doll stumble, fall, get back up, and pull funny faces. Slowly, Lily's eyes began to follow the movements. After a few minutes, she gave a small smile. "She smiled," Amanda whispered. "It's the first time in 6 months." Richard placed a hand on the woman's shoulder. "Amanda, welcome to the family." As he watched Frank work his magic with another child, Richard reflected on everything that had happened over the past year. He had lost a company, but gained a life's mission. He had lost the illusion that money solved everything, but discovered that the right people in the right place could perform miracles. Ethan came over and took his hand. "Daddy, do you think Lily will get better like I did?" "I'm sure of it, sweetheart. Frank has a special gift." "That's true. But so do you, Daddy." "Me? You had the gift of finding Frank." Richard smiled and hugged his son. Ethan was right. Sometimes a person's greatest talent is recognizing the talent in others. In the distance, Frank continued playing with Lily, who was now giggling softly. Amanda was crying, but now they were tears of hope. Mrs. Wilson approached Richard. "Doctor, you know this girl is going to be another one who recovers, right?" "I do, Mrs. Wilson. Frank never fails." "It's not just Frank. It's everyone here. It's the environment you've created. It's the love everyone puts into what they do." Richard looked around and saw Rebecca talking to the parents of an autistic child. Margaret organizing activities for the next week, old George fixing a broken toy, and Catherine coordinating everything with her usual efficiency. It was a big, unusual family, united by a common purpose, making special children feel normal and helping normal children understand that everyone is special in some way. "Mrs. Wilson," Richard said, "I think we've created something more important than a rehabilitation center." "What have we created?" "A community, a place where people truly care about each other." Mrs. Wilson smiled. "That's exactly right, Doctor. And do you know what's most beautiful?" "What?" "It all started with you having the courage to stop on the street to listen to a homeless man." Richard laughed. "That's true. Frank was just a poor homeless man doing tricks on the street. And you were just a wealthy businessman driving by. And look how it turned out. It turned into a beautiful story, Doctor. A beautiful story." At that moment, Ethan made Lily laugh for the first time in 6 months. The sound echoed through the yard, making everyone pause their activities to listen. Frank looked at Richard and gave a thumbs up. Amanda hugged her daughter, crying with joy, and Richard understood he had found his true place in the world. He was no longer a millionaire businessman. He was a father who had learned that life's greatest wealth isn't in what we keep for ourselves, but in what we share with others. And it had all started with an unlikely encounter on a busy avenue between a desperate man carrying his sick son and a homeless man who refused to take money just to make a child laugh. Sometimes the greatest miracles come from the simplest meetings, and sometimes the people we least expect are exactly the ones we need most. The end. Now tell me, what did you think of this story of perseverance and kindness? Do you believe Richard made the right choice by giving up everything for his son's happiness? Share your thoughts in the comments about the transformative power of love and dedication. And if this story touched your heart as deeply as it touched mine, don't forget to hit like and subscribe for more inspiring tales.